57 to. My parents stole my $50K college fund for my sister's fake business. They didn't know I grew up to buy their bankrupt empire. To the esteemed guests of the Oak Brook Country Club, I ask you to raise a glass to the future. My father, Arthur Sterling, boomed into the microphone, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings and crystal chandeliers of the grand ballroom. 200 of Chicago's wealthiest socialites, bankers, and real estate tycoons lifted their crystal flutes in unison. Standing just outside the heavy mahogany double doors, I watched him through the narrow crack. He was wearing a bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo he hadn't actually paid for, projecting the flawless, untouchable image of a billionaire titan. Beside him stood my mother, Evelyn, dripping in borrowed diamonds, and my younger sister, Madison, posing for the event photographer in a custom $12,000 silk gown. They were hosting this lavish, six-figure gala to celebrate their survival. Their company, Sterling Luxury Real Estate, was secretly drowning in catastrophic debt. They had spent the last 6 months desperately begging for a lifeline, and finally, a notoriously aggressive, anonymous private equity firm out of New York had agreed to a massive, multi-million-dollar buyout. They thought tonight was their salvation. They thought they were going to sign the final paperwork in front of their elite peers, proving they were untouchable. They had absolutely no idea that the anonymous CEO of that private equity firm was me. My name is Harper. I am 29 years old, and I am the sole founder of Vanguard Holdings. But to the three people standing on that stage, beaming at the applauding crowd, I was just the worthless, selfish daughter they had violently evicted and thrown onto the street exactly 10 years ago. It has been a challenging year for the real estate market, Arthur continued, pressing a hand to his chest in a practiced display of fake humility. But a true captain weathers the storm. Tonight, we officially announce our merger with Vanguard Holdings. We are honored to welcome their CEO, who has flown in tonight to finalize our new partnership. The ballroom erupted into enthusiastic applause. The string quartet began to swell. I pushed the heavy mahogany doors open. I wasn't wearing the trash bag of clothes I had left their house with a decade ago. I was wearing a razor-sharp, tailored black power suit, my heels clicking methodically against the imported marble floor. The crowd parted for me, murmurs of curiosity rippling through the sea of tuxedos and gowns. As I walked down the center aisle toward the stage, my father's charismatic, practiced smile faltered. His eyes narrowed. Beside him, my mother's jaw actually dropped. Harper. My mother whispered into the microphone, the amplified sound echoing through the suddenly quiet ballroom. My sister Madison scoffed, rolling her eyes in exaggerated disgust. "Are you kidding me? Who let her in?" "Security." I ignored them, walking directly up the carpeted stairs and stepping onto the center of the stage. My father's face was rapidly cycling through shock, fury, and panic. "What the hell are you doing here?" Arthur hissed, stepping toward me, using his body to block me from the crowd. His voice was a venomous whisper meant only for my ears. "You are ruining the biggest night of my life. The CEO of Vanguard is about to walk through those doors. Get off my stage before I have you arrested for trespassing." I didn't blink. I didn't back down. I calmly reached out, took the microphone directly from his trembling hand, and turned to face the 200 wealthy investors staring at us in stunned silence. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice crystal clear and entirely devoid of emotion. "My name is Harper Sterling. For those of you who don't know me, I am Arthur and Evelyn's eldest daughter. I am also the founder and chief executive officer of Vanguard Holdings." A collective, deafening gasp ripped through the ballroom. A wine glass shattered somewhere in the back row. My father physically stumbled backward, the blood completely draining from his face. "No," he choked out. "No, that's impossible. You're a nobody." "My father just told you all that we are here to celebrate a merger," I continued, projecting my voice so it bounced off the high ceilings. "But he is lying to you. Sterling Luxury Real Estate isn't merging. They are bankrupt. For the past 4 years, they have been secretly draining company accounts to fund my sister Madison's failed lifestyle brands and to cover her massive credit card debt." Shut up right now." Madison shrieked, her face twisting in ugly panic. I ignored her, locking eyes with my terrified parents. 10 years ago, my parents stole my entire $50,000 college fund to pay for Madison's mistakes. When I threatened to call the police, they threw me onto the street. So tonight, I am not here to bail them out. I have purchased every single ounce of their debt. I am here to formally announce the total liquidation of their company, the immediate termination of their executive board, and the repossession of their commercial assets, including the luxury cars currently parked in the valet. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the suffocating, heavy quiet of an empire instantly collapsing in real time. Before I reveal exactly how I orchestrated this ruthless corporate takeover, exposed my parents' darkest financial crimes to all of their friends, and left my golden child sister weeping in the country club driveway, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. But only if you genuinely connect with this story. Drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. Also, I want to hear from you. What would you have done if your parents emptied your hard-earned savings account for your sibling? Let's talk about it in the comments. To understand how I could stand on that stage, look at the sheer terror in my father's eyes, and feel absolutely nothing but cold, calculated resolve, I need to take you back 10 years. I need to take you back to a time when Arthur and Evelyn Sterling held all the power, and I was nothing more than a ghost haunting the hallways of their pristine, 6-bedroom suburban estate. If you looked at our family Christmas cards from a decade ago, you would see the picture of Midwestern perfection. Arthur was a rising star in luxury real estate, Evelyn was the chair of the local country club's charity committee, and my sister Madison was the undisputed center of their universe. In the Sterling household, the hierarchy was never hidden, it was proudly displayed. Madison was the golden child. She was vivacious, loud, conventionally gorgeous, and perfectly fit my mother's image of an ideal trophy daughter. I, on the other hand, was quiet, fiercely independent, and possessed a deeply analytical mind that my father viewed not as an asset, but as an annoyance. The blatant financial favoritism was suffocating. When Madison turned 16, my parents threw a lavish, catered party at the country club and surprised her with a brand-new, pearl-white BMW convertible. When I turned 16 a few years prior, my mother handed me a generic drugstore card, and my father told me that if I wanted spending money, the local bakery down the street was hiring dishwashers. "We are teaching you the value of $1, Harper," my father would say, swirling the ice in his Scotch glass from the comfort of his leather recliner. Madison is a social creature. She needs to network. She's an investment in this family's social standing. You're different. You need to learn how to survive on your own. And survive I did. But I didn't just want to survive, I wanted to escape. My ticket out of that toxic, emotionally barren house was a pristine acceptance letter to a top-tier university's finance program. But unlike Madison, whose out-of-state private college tuition was fully funded by my parents without a second thought, I was entirely on my own. My father flatly refused to co-sign a student loan or contribute a single dime to my education. So, I built my own salvation. From the age of 15 to 18, I subjected myself to a punishing, unrelenting grind. I woke up at 3:30 a.m. every single morning to work the opening shift at the bakery. I scrubbed industrial mixing bowls until my knuckles bled, mopped floors smelling of stale yeast and bleach, and smiled through exhaustion for minimum wage. After school, I tutored wealthy kids in calculus, hoarding every single dollar, every tip, and every birthday check I ever received. Because I was a minor when I started working, the law required an adult cosigner on my bank account. My father had put his name on it, a purely administrative technicality, or so I thought. By the summer after my high school graduation, I had done the impossible. Through sheer, bone-deep grit, I had saved exactly $52,400. It was enough to cover my first 2 years of tuition, room, and board. That money wasn't just currency to me, it was my blood, my lost teenage years, my sleep deprivation, and my absolute freedom. I remember the exact moment the illusion of my family completely shattered. It was a Tuesday afternoon in August. I was sitting at the public library, logged into the university's student portal, ready to pay my massive freshman tuition deposit. I pulled out my debit card, my hands trembling with excitement, and typed in the numbers. I hit submit. Transaction declined. I frowned, assuming it was a daily spending limit error. I opened a new tab, logged into my online banking portal, and waited for the dashboard to load. When the screen refreshed, my heart completely stopped beating. The breath was violently sucked out of my lungs. Available balance, $0. I frantically refreshed the page. I called the bank's automated line. The automated voice confirmed the nightmare. Exactly 48 hours prior, a complete withdrawal of $52,400 had been authorized and transferred to a different account. The authorizing signature belonged to Arthur Sterling. Panic and a sickening, primal dread washed over me. I sprinted the entire 2 miles back to our estate, my lungs burning, the summer heat suffocating me. I burst through the heavy mahogany front doors, my chest heaving. I found them in the sunroom. My father was casually reading the Wall Street Journal. My mother was sipping iced tea. And Madison was sitting on the plush sofa, surrounded by high-end shopping bags from Gucci and Prada, unboxing a professional $4,000 DSLR camera. Where is my money? I demanded, my voice shaking so violently it barely sounded like my own. My father didn't even flinch. He slowly folded his newspaper and set it on the coffee table. He looked up at me with an expression of absolute, terrifying calm. "Lower your voice in this house, Harper," he commanded. "You emptied my account." I screamed, tears of pure betrayal hot and stinging in my eyes. That was my tuition. That was $50,000 of my money. Where is it? My mother sighed, setting her iced tea down with an annoyed click. "Harper, stop being so dramatic. Your sister has an incredible business opportunity, and we needed liquid capital to get her startup off the ground." I stared at her, completely paralyzed by the sheer audacity of her words. I looked at Madison. "A business?" I choked out. "What business?" Madison rolled her eyes, adjusting her perfectly styled hair. "It's an influencer content house, Harper. God, you're so out of touch. I rented a luxury penthouse downtown to shoot lifestyle content. It's an investment. Dad said I needed seed money for the deposit, the interior designer, and my equipment. You wouldn't understand. It takes money to make money." My parents had stolen 3 years of my literal blood, sweat, and agonizing labor to pay for a fake, narcissistic social media fantasy for their favorite child. That was my college fund. I yelled, the devastation finally cracking my ribs open. "I scrubbed floors for 3 years. You didn't pay for her college, and now you're stealing from me to buy her designer bags." "Watch your mouth," my father roared, standing up. His physical size instantly dominated the room, but the betrayal had burned away any fear I had left. "You live under my roof. You eat my food. That account had my name on it, which legally makes it my money. Family helps family, Harper. Your sister is building a brand. You're just going to sit in a library for 4 years. She is an investment. You are just smart enough to figure it out on your own." "I am calling the police," I said, my voice dropping to a lethal, trembling whisper. "I am calling the police and reporting you for theft." The room fell deathly silent. Madison stopped playing with her camera. My mother gasped, clutching her pearls in genuine shock, but my father's face morphed into something entirely monstrous. The mask of the civilized, wealthy patriarch completely disintegrated. His eyes darkened with an explosive, venomous fury. He marched across the room, grabbed my arm with a crushing grip, and dragged me toward the front door. "Arthur, what are you doing?" Mother asked, her voice barely a whisper. "She wants to act like a hostile stranger. She gets treated like one," he spat. He dragged me into the foyer, threw open the heavy front doors, and violently shoved me out onto the concrete porch. I stumbled and fell to my knees, scraping my palms on the stone. "You turned 19 last week," my father sneered, standing in the doorway like a towering executioner. "You are legally an adult. You want to threaten me with the police over my own money. Then you can do it from the street. You are officially evicted. You are dead to me." "Dad, please." I cried out, the reality of my situation crashing down on me. I had $0. I had no car. I had no safety net. You can't do this. Watch me, he said coldly. If you ever set foot on my property again, I will have you arrested for trespassing. He slammed the door shut. The deadbolt engaged with a heavy, final click. A few minutes later, a black plastic garbage bag was thrown out the second-story window by my mother, landing in the bushes. It contained a few pairs of jeans, some t-shirts, and my winter coat. I sat on the concrete porch for 2 hours, completely numb. I had been erased. I had been stripped of my life savings, my future, and the basic illusion that my parents possessed the capacity to love me. They had sacrificed my entire existence just to make Madison smile. But as the sun began to set, casting long, dark shadows over their manicured lawn, the tears completely stopped. The hysterical panic drained out of my body, replaced by something cold, heavy, and absolutely unbreakable. They thought they had destroyed me. They thought that without their money and their roof, I would simply vanish into obscurity, a necessary casualty for the golden child's success. They had absolutely no idea that standing up from that concrete porch and walking away with a trash bag over my shoulder was the moment the scapegoat died, and the CEO of their future destruction was born. The first night after you are erased by your own family is a very specific, paralyzing kind of cold. When the heavy front door of the Sterling estate slammed shut behind me, taking my $52,400 life savings and my entire future with it, I didn't have a cinematic breakdown. I didn't scream at the sky. I simply picked up the black plastic garbage bag containing 3 t-shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, and my winter coat, and I started walking. I didn't have a car. I didn't have a credit card. I had exactly $14.30 in my pocket from my last bakery tip jar. I walked for 4 miles in the dark until I reached the downtown district, eventually pushing through the glass doors of a 24-hour women's crisis shelter. I sat in a hard plastic chair in the corner of the intake room, clutching my garbage bag, trying to make myself as small and invisible as possible. That was the exact moment I met Martha. Martha was a 65-year-old retired financial advisor who volunteered at the shelter on Tuesday nights. She was a woman carved from granite, sharp-tongued, fiercely observant, and utterly intolerant of self-pity. She didn't approach me with sad eyes or condescending apologies. She walked over, dropped a hot cup of black coffee on the table in front of me, and looked at the complex calculus equations I was frantically scribbling in the margins of a discarded newspaper just to keep my mind from shattering. "You look like you're calculating the exact velocity of your own rock bottom," Martha said, her voice dry as sandpaper. "Drink the coffee. You're going to need the caffeine." When my own parents looked at me, they saw a liability. When Martha looked at me, she saw a terrifyingly sharp mind trapped in a desperate situation. She didn't just give me a cot for the night, she gave me a lifeline. After a week at the shelter, Martha offered me the spare room over her detached garage. The rent was simple. I would clean her house, organize her decades of messy financial files, and survive. What followed over the next 5 years was a punishing, bone-deep grind that stripped me down to my absolute rawest elements. I wasn't just surviving, I was fighting a daily, silent war to prove to myself that my father was wrong about me. My schedule was a suffocating loop of manual labor and intellectual obsession. I woke up at 4:00 a.m. to work the opening shift as a barista, scalding my hands on industrial espresso machines. At 1:00 p.m., I took the city bus to a commercial office park, where I worked until 9:00 p.m. as a janitor, emptying the trash cans of wealthy corporate executives. I lived on a razor's edge of poverty. I couldn't afford to replace the clothes in my garbage bag, so I wore the same 3 faded t-shirts in rotation until the collars frayed and the fabric grew dangerously thin. When the soles of my cheap sneakers began to detach, I duct-taped them back together just to keep the freezing Chicago rain from numbing my toes. I lived entirely on discounted oats, bulk rice, and whatever expired pastries the coffee shop let me take home. Sleep was a luxury I simply couldn't afford. From 10 2:00 p.m. until 2:00 a.m., while the rest of the world rested, I sat at a wobbly folding table in Martha's garage, staring at the blinding light of a second-hand laptop. I sacrificed absolutely everything to build my mind. While organizing Martha's old files, I had started studying market trends, aggressive private equity strategies, and corporate restructuring. Martha recognized my obsessive genius. She became the loving, fiercely protective mentor my mother never was. She taught me how to read a P&L statement like a crime scene, how to spot vulnerabilities in massive companies, and how to negotiate with ruthless, emotionless precision. When I was 22, using $2,000 I had painfully scraped together from mopping floors, I made my first major independent investment. Within 6 months, using a predictive algorithm I had coded myself, I turned that $2,000 into $40,000. Then, I turned it into $400,000. The snowball effect was violent and magnificent. By the time I was 25, I formally incorporated Vanguard Holdings. I started buying out distressed commercial assets, restructuring them, and flipping them for massive profits. I worked 100-hour weeks, operating with the terrifying stamina of someone who knows what it feels like to freeze on a concrete porch. By my 28th birthday, my boutique firm was managing hundreds of millions in assets. I was quietly, staggeringly wealthy. One of my very first acts as CEO was buying Martha a stunning, paid-in-full lakeside estate in Michigan. The woman who handed me a cup of coffee when I was a homeless teenager was now a millionaire by proxy. That is how you treat your chosen family. But despite my life-altering success, I made a strict, unyielding decision. My biological family could never, ever know I existed. I legally structured Vanguard Holdings through a labyrinth of anonymous LLCs and proxy boards. My name was completely scrubbed from public corporate registries. To the outside world, the CEO of Vanguard was a faceless, untouchable ghost. I kept my empire entirely hidden because the digital ghosts of my past still haunted my periphery. Occasionally, during a rare moment of downtime, I would look up my sister Madison's public social media. It was a parade of unearned luxury. But I also saw the cracks. Her ridiculous, influencer content house, the exact business my parents stole my $52,400 to fund, had spectacularly failed within 8 months. Madison had amassed 6 figures in credit card debt, trying to maintain the illusion of wealth, forcing my parents to quietly bleed their own real estate brokerage dry just to cover her tracks. I knew exactly what would happen if Arthur and Evelyn Sterling discovered that the scapegoat they kicked out was suddenly a private equity titan. The hands that had violently shoved me into the street would instantly turn into open palms. They would invoke the sacred, toxic bond of family to demand I bail out their failing company and fund Madison's designer lifestyle. So, I chose to stay in the shadows. I wore bespoke tailored suits in Manhattan boardrooms, yet remained a completely deleted file in my hometown. I found immense, grounding peace in my silence. My self-worth was no longer tied to their approval. It was secured in my offshore accounts, my brilliant legal team, and the unbreakable titanium spine I had forged from their betrayal. I was completely safe. I was untouchable. Or so I thought, until my director of acquisitions walked into my penthouse office on a rainy Tuesday morning, dropped a catastrophic bankruptcy portfolio on my mahogany desk, and told me that a failing luxury real estate firm in Chicago was begging us for a buyout. I opened the folder, saw my father's desperate, sprawling signature on the bottom line of the plea, and realized the universe had just hand-delivered me the ultimate opportunity for an absolute reckoning. The Oak Brook Country Club was the epicenter of Chicago's old money, a sprawling estate of manicured greens, vaulted ceilings, and exclusivity. On the night of the Vanguard Holdings merger gala, my parents had pulled out all the stops to project an illusion of untouchable wealth. From my vantage point in the VIP mezzanine overlooking the grand ballroom, I watched the spectacle unfold. Waiters in crisp white jackets circulated with silver trays of champagne and caviar. A live string quartet played softly in the corner. Below me, 200 of the city's most influential figures, bankers, real estate developers, and politicians, mingled under the glow of cascading crystal chandeliers. In the center of it all was my father, Arthur Sterling, holding court. He wore a bespoke tuxedo, laughing loudly, clapping men on the shoulder. My mother, Evelyn, stood beside him, draped in diamonds that were undoubtedly leased for the evening. And there was Madison, the golden child, wearing a $12,000 silk gown, posing for society photographers as if she were Hollywood royalty. They were celebrating their survival. For the last 6 months, Sterling Luxury Real Estate had been secretly hemorrhaging money, entirely due to my parents bleeding the corporate accounts dry to cover Madison's catastrophic, 6-figure credit card debts from her failed influencer content house. They were days away from defaulting on their commercial loans when my firm, Vanguard Holdings, stepped in and purchased their debt. I had my legal team draft the contracts under the guise of a strategic acquisition, keeping my name completely off the paperwork. My father, blinded by his own desperation and arrogance, eagerly agreed to the terms, assuming the anonymous New York private equity firm simply wanted a foothold in the Chicago market. He insisted on hosting this gala to sign the final paperwork publicly, desperate to prove to his peers that he was still a titan of industry. At 8:30 p.m., the string quartet faded out, and the master of ceremonies tapped the microphone, asking the crowd to take their seats. It was time for the keynote speech. Arthur strode up the carpeted steps to the grand stage, beaming as the spotlight hit him. He adjusted his silk tie and leaned into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed friends," my father's booming voice echoed through the silent ballroom. "Tonight is a monumental evening for the Sterling family. As you know, the luxury real estate market has been turbulent, but a true captain doesn't just weather the storm, he expands his fleet." A polite smattering of applause rippled through the room. I stood up from my chair in the shadows of the mezzanine, signaling my lead attorney, Mr. Vance, who stood by the audio-visual booth. "Tonight, we officially announce our strategic merger with Vanguard Holdings, one of the most aggressive and successful private equity firms on the East Coast," Arthur declared proudly. "But I cannot take all the credit for this historic partnership." My father dropped his voice into a tone of deep, theatrical affection and gestured grandly toward the front table. "This deal was brought to the table through the brilliant networking and modern business acumen of our newly appointed Vice President of Marketing, my beautiful daughter, Madison." The spotlight violently swung to illuminate Madison. She stood up, feigning a modest smile, waving gracefully to the crowd as the ballroom erupted into enthusiastic applause. It was a masterclass in narcissistic delusion. Not only was my father lying about the buyout being a merger, but he was explicitly giving the golden child, who had literally bankrupted their empire with her shopping addiction, the credit for saving it. They were using my money to elevate her to corporate stardom. It was time to pull the plug. I gave Mr. Vance a subtle nod. He tapped his tablet. Instantly, the massive digital projection screens behind my father, which had been displaying the Sterling Luxury logo, went completely black. The microphone in my father's hand let out a sharp, piercing screech of feedback. The crowd flinched. The applause died instantly. Arthur tapped his mic, looking confusedly toward the sound booth. "Just a minor technical difficulty, folks." "There is no technical difficulty, Arthur," my voice rang out, amplified by the wireless microphone I held in my hand. The entire ballroom collectively gasped, 200 heads snapping up toward the grand staircase. I stepped out of the shadows and began my descent. I was wearing a razor-sharp, tailored charcoal power suit, my heels clicking rhythmically, authoritatively against the marble steps. "And there is no strategic merger," I added, stepping onto the main floor. The sea of tuxedos and gowns parted for me as I walked straight down the center aisle. On stage, my father's charismatic smile instantly disintegrated. The blood rushed out of his face, leaving him a sickly shade of gray. Down in the front row, Madison froze, her smug smile sliding off her face. "Harper," my mother gasped, standing up so fast her chair screeched against the floor. My father's toxic instincts momentarily overrode his panic. He lunged toward the edge of the stage, his face twisting in fury. "What the hell are you doing here?" He hissed, keeping his voice low so only the front rows could hear. "Security, get this trespasser out of here." I didn't stop. I walked up the side stairs and stepped directly onto the center of the stage. My lead attorney immediately stepped between my father and me, flashing a heavy, leather-bound portfolio. I turned to face the 200 wealthy investors, bankers, and socialites. "Good evening. My name is Harper," I said, my voice leveled, cold, and completely unshakable. "For those of you who don't know me, I am Arthur and Evelyn's eldest daughter. I am also the sole founder and chief executive officer of Vanguard Holdings." A shocked murmur violently ripped through the crowd. A prominent bank executive in the second row dropped his champagne flute. It shattered against the floor, but nobody even looked down. "My father just stood up here and told you a beautiful story about family legacy," I continued, projecting my voice to the furthest corners of the room. "He told you that his vice president, Madison, brokered a merger. But the truth is, Madison doesn't even know how to read a basic profit and loss statement. She is simply the reason this company is completely bankrupt." "Harper, stop," my father pleaded, a desperate, hysterical edge ruining his baritone voice. He looked out at his peers, his eyes wide with terror. "She's lying. She's a disgruntled runaway. She doesn't know what she's saying." "I know that you have been rejected by every major lender in this room," I said, turning slightly to look him dead in the eye. I pointed up to the massive projection screens. On cue, my team displayed the official, unredacted financial ledgers of Sterling Luxury Real Estate. The massive debt, the defaulted loans, and the drained corporate accounts were broadcasted in 20-foot-tall numbers for every country club elite to see. 10 years ago, I announced to the silent, horrified crowd, my parents secretly emptied my bank account. They stole my $52,000 college fund, money I made scrubbing floors at a bakery, to pay for Madison's failed lifestyle startup. When I threatened to call the police, they threw me out into the street with a garbage bag of clothes and told me I was dead to them. My mother covered her mouth, sobbing openly. Madison sank back into her chair, burying her face in her hands. "They thought I would vanish," I said, my voice hardening into titanium. "Instead, I built an empire. So no, Arthur, I am not here to partner with you. I bought your debt because you are a liability." Effective immediately, Sterling Luxury Real Estate is fully liquidated. The executive board is dissolved. You are formally terminated without severance. And Madison's fictional vice president title is permanently revoked. I turned fully to my father, who was trembling so violently he looked like he might collapse. The arrogant patriarch who had locked me out of my home was completely, publicly broken. "You told me that family helps family," I whispered to him, my voice echoing through the silent ballroom. "But I don't bail out bad investments. Get off my stage." For 10 agonizing seconds, the grand ballroom of the Oak Brook Country Club was a vacuum of absolute, suffocating silence. 200 of Chicago's most elite business moguls, socialites, and investors stared up at the 20-foot-tall projection screens. The unredacted financial ledgers of Sterling Luxury Real Estate were displayed in high definition for everyone to read. The defaulted loans, the completely drained corporate accounts, and the six-figure credit card debts under Madison's name were undeniable. The pristine, untouchable facade of the Sterling family wasn't just cracking, it was detonating in real time. Then, the chaos erupted. The silence shattered into a deafening roar of overlapping gasps, furious whispers, and outright shouts. Down in the front row, the lead loan officer from the bank that had rejected my parents' extension just 3 days prior stood up, his face flushed with anger, realizing Arthur had boldly lied to his face about their financial health. Investors who had golfed with my father for a decade were suddenly taking physical steps backward, putting distance between themselves and the radioactive fallout of a bankrupt fraud. On stage, my father's survival instincts finally kicked in, but they were entirely useless against cold, hard data. He lunged for the microphone stand, his hands trembling so violently he knocked it over. "Ladies and gentlemen, please," Arthur bellowed, a desperate, hysterical edge completely ruining his usually booming baritone. This is a private family matter. My daughter is unwell. She has been estranged for years. She doesn't understand the complexities of corporate restructuring. I understand them perfectly, Arthur, I interrupted, my voice projected clearly from the wireless mic in my hand. I didn't raise my tone. I didn't need to. The truth is always loudest when it's spoken quietly. I understand that you fraudulently leveraged your employee's pension fund to secure a bridge loan last quarter. I understand that your vice president daughter expensed over $200,000 in luxury travel and designer clothing to a failing commercial ledger. It's all in the Vanguard audit. My lead attorney, Mr. Vance, systematically walked down the front row, handing thick, bound copies of the executed acquisition and liquidation contracts directly to my parents' former board of directors and top investors. The physical proof was irrefutable. My father looked at the papers, then looked at the crowd. The people he had bribed, the country club elites he had desperately tried to impress, they were all turning their backs, their expressions morphing from shock to absolute disgust. He was a fraud. In their world, losing money was a sin, but lying to them about it was an unforgivable crime. While my father was hyperventilating on stage, the reality of the situation finally pierced through Madison's thick armor of entitlement. The golden child hiked up her $12,000 silk gown and stormed up the stairs to the stage, her face twisted in an ugly, childish fury. The poised, pageantry socialite vanished, instantly replaced by the spoiled, petulant 26-year-old she truly was. "You're lying," Madison shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at my face. Her mascara was already starting to smudge as panicked tears welled in her eyes. "You can't do this. You're just a glorified janitor. Chase, tell them she's lying." She turned wildly toward the front row, searching for her fiancé, Chase, a wealthy junior partner at a corporate law firm who only loved her for her supposed trust fund and elite social standing. Chase didn't move to help her. He was staring at the massive projection screen, specifically at the column displaying Madison's catastrophic debt. "You told me your content house startup was valued at $5 million, Chase said, his voice cold and echoing in the tense room. "You have $200,000 in credit card debt. You don't have a trust fund." "Chase, please, it's just a cash flow issue," Madison begged, her voice cracking. "We're done, Madison," Chase said flatly. He placed his champagne glass on the table, adjusted his suit jacket, and walked straight out of the ballroom without looking back. Madison let out a guttural sob, but I wasn't finished. "You don't have a cash flow issue, Madison. You have nothing," I corrected her, pulling a single sheet of paper from my jacket pocket. "Your entire lifestyle was funded by company credit lines, which means, legally, they are corporate assets of sterling real estate. Your black cards were frozen by my team exactly 2 hours ago. Furthermore, that white BMW convertible you drove here tonight, your parents put it under a commercial fleet lease for a tax write-off. Vanguard Holdings now owns that fleet. A repossession team is towing it from the country club valet right now." Madison physically stumbled backward as if I had struck her. The blood completely drained from her face. In less than 5 minutes, the golden child had lost her fake wealth, her stolen car, her unearned title, and the conditional love of her fiancé. She sank to the carpeted steps of the stage, sobbing loudly and messily, completely ignored by the crowd. As the ballroom began to empty, guests rushing to the exits to distance themselves from the Sterling family, my mother, Evelyn, finally broke. She scrambled up the stairs, bypassing her weeping favorite daughter entirely, and practically threw herself at my feet. The heavy, leased diamond necklace around her throat looked more like a chain weighing her down. "Harper, please." Evelyn sobbed, her hands shaking as she tried to reach for my arm. I took a deliberate step back, refusing to let her touch me. "Please, sweetie, you can't do this. We're your parents. We gave you life. If you liquidate the company, the bank will seize the estate. We won't have anywhere to go." My father stood a few feet away, completely broken. The arrogant patriarch who had violently shoved me out the front door was gone, replaced by a hollow, terrified shell of a man. He fell to his knees next to my mother. "Harper, I'm begging you. Arthur choked out, tears finally spilling over his eyelashes, mixing with the sweat on his face. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I'll do anything. Just give us a severance package. Give us a 5% consulting fee. You have hundreds of millions of dollars, you don't need it all. Family helps family, right? Please, don't leave us on the street. I stood on the stage, looking down at the three of them, a weeping mother, a shattered father, and a ruined golden child. I felt absolutely no anger. I felt no pity. I just felt a profound, grounding sense of absolute closure. 10 years ago, I began, my voice dropping to a quiet, lethal register meant only for them, I sat on the concrete porch of your house. I begged you not to steal the $52,000 I made scrubbing floors. I told you I had nothing. Evelyn flinched, squeezing her eyes shut. Arthur looked at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. Do you remember what you told me, Arthur? I asked. He didn't answer, just letting out a pathetic, shaking sob. So I answered for him. You told me that I was legally an adult. You threw a garbage bag of clothes out the window, and you told me I was dead to you, I stated, repeating the exact words that had fueled my survival for a decade. You threw me away because I was no longer financially useful to you. Well, today, you are no longer financially viable to me. I am simply cutting my losses. I turned my back on them. You aren't family, I said over my shoulder as I began to walk away, flanked by my security and legal team. You're just a bad investment, and I don't bail out bad investments. I walked down the steps of the stage and exited the grand ballroom without looking back a single time. Behind me, I could hear the desperate, echoing sobs of my mother and sister and the panicked, broken silence of my father. They had expected a desperate, weeping teenager to simply vanish into the night. Instead, they had forged a ruthless CEO who returned to legally and methodically take absolutely everything they had. The morning after the Vanguard Holdings Gala, I didn't wake up feeling a fiery sense of triumphant vengeance. I didn't pop a bottle of champagne or throw a lavish party to celebrate the destruction of sterling luxury real estate. When I opened my eyes in my downtown Chicago penthouse, the only thing I felt was a profound, unshakable, and absolute quiet. It was the kind of deep, grounding peace you only experience when a lifelong, suffocating weight has finally been permanently lifted off your chest. For the first 18 years of my life, my nervous system had been hardwired to anticipate the chaotic, conditional love of my family. I was conditioned to brace for my father's cruel, belittling insults, my mother's dismissive sneers, and my sister's manufactured, expensive emergencies. Even during the decade I spent building my empire in the shadows, a tiny, subconscious part of me was always bracing for the moment they would find out and try to tear me back down. But as I sat on my balcony that Sunday morning, sipping black coffee and watching the sun rise over Lake Michigan, there was nothing left to brace for. The monster wasn't hiding under the bed anymore. I had bought the house, evicted the monster, and changed the locks. Of course, a deeply narcissistic family structure doesn't just quietly accept defeat and fade into the background. When the golden child is violently dethroned and the arrogant patriarch is stripped of his power, they inevitably resort to the only tactic they have left in their arsenal: weaponized guilt. By Tuesday morning, the brutal reality of the liquidation had set in. The commercial bank accounts were frozen. The country club memberships were revoked. The Sterling estate was officially in the early stages of foreclosure, and the desperate, frantic attempts to breach my newly constructed walls began. My private phone number, a closely guarded secret I had kept hidden for years, suddenly began blowing up with voicemails and text messages. They had clearly badgered my legal team and corporate receptionists until they found a backdoor to reach me. First came the apologies from my mother. They weren't apologies for stealing my college fund or throwing me onto a freezing concrete porch, of course. They were apologies for the unfortunate misunderstandings of the past. Evelyn left tearful, hysterical voicemails claiming that her blood pressure was dangerously high, that she hadn't slept in days, and that a mother and daughter should never be at war. She begged me to come over for dinner, promising we could figure out a way to reverse the acquisition as a family. Then came the barrage of texts from Madison, Stripped of her corporate credit cards, her luxury SUV, and her wealthy fiancé, the golden child suddenly remembered she had an older sister. Her messages were a frantic, chaotic mix of bargaining and manipulation. "Harper, I'm literally going to be homeless," she texted on Wednesday afternoon. "Chase left me. I have nothing. I know we had our differences when we were kids, but I'm your little sister. You have hundreds of millions of dollars. You can't just leave me on the street. Please, let me come work for you at Vanguard. I'll do anything. I had to ride the public bus today, Harper. Please." Finally, there were the flying monkeys, the extended aunts, uncles, and family friends from the country club who had gleefully ignored my existence for a decade. They flooded my corporate inbox with long, preachy emails about the sanctity of family. They told me that I was being exceptionally cruel, that my father's legacy was destroyed, and that holding a grudge was toxic. "They are still your parents, Harper," one aunt wrote. "You have to forgive them. Blood is thicker than water." Society constantly conditions us to believe that biology dictates an infinite capacity for forgiveness. We are taught from a young age that being the bigger person means allowing toxic people back into our lives simply because they share our DNA. We are told that an apology, even a desperate, financially motivated one, demands immediate absolution. We are pressured to forgive and forget, to keep the peace, and to absorb the pain so the family unit can pretend it isn't rotting from the inside out. I completely, fundamentally reject that narrative. I didn't block their numbers immediately. I didn't yell, scream, or type out furious, emotional paragraphs defending my actions. Engaging with toxicity only gives it oxygen, and I refused to breathe life back into their dying empire. My anger was gone. What remained was pure, cold titanium. Instead of an emotional confrontation, I had Mr. Vance, my lead attorney, draft a strict, legally binding cease and desist order. It outlined, in cold, sterile corporate language, that Arthur, Evelyn, and Madison Sterling were legally barred from contacting me, my employees, or any subsidiaries of Vanguard Holdings. Any attempt to bypass this boundary, whether by phone, email, or physical proximity, would result in immediate harassment charges and the aggressive seizure of their remaining personal assets to cover the logistical debt they still owed my firm. I had a private courier deliver the documents directly to the front door of the sprawling estate they were currently packing up in boxes. I didn't forgive them. I don't believe that true healing requires conventional forgiveness, especially when the people who broke you are only sorry because they finally lost control over you. Setting a strict, unyielding boundary is not an act of malice, and it is not an act of revenge. It is an act of survival. I didn't owe my mother a dinner. I didn't owe Madison a job, and I certainly didn't owe my father a second chance to ruin my life. When the courier called my office to confirm the documents were delivered and signed for, a final, massive shift occurred within my psyche. For the first 20 years of my life, my entire identity was wrapped up in trying to prove my worth to Arthur and Evelyn Sterling. Every early morning shift at the bakery, every dollar I saved, every complex financial model I built in Martha's freezing garage was initially driven by a subconscious, desperate hope that one day I would be rich enough, successful enough, and powerful enough for them to finally look at me and say, "We are proud of you." But as I sat in my corner office on the top floor of the Vanguard building, looking out over the city I had conquered, I realized something incredibly liberating. I didn't want their pride. Their validation was utterly worthless to me. They were incompetent, cruel, and morally bankrupt people. Why would I ever need a seat at their dining table when I owned the entire building? Why would I want the approval of a father who calculated my worth on a ledger, or a mother who only loved the daughter she could brag about to her friends? My self-worth was no longer up for negotiation. It was forged in a homeless shelter, hammered into steel in the boardrooms of Manhattan, and polished by the unwavering love of the mentor who actually chose me. I am completely, undeniably whole, just as I am. The door to my past is not just closed, it has been permanently bricked over. They will spend the rest of their lives dealing with the consequences of their greed, downsizing to a modest apartment, and forcing their golden child to finally get a minimum wage job. I won't be there to watch it happen, and I won't be there to catch them when they fall. I am finally, entirely free. These days, the holidays look completely different for me. When winter rolls around in Chicago and the freezing winds blow off Lake Michigan, I don't feel that familiar, suffocating knot of dread in my stomach anymore. I don't brace myself for belittling remarks disguised as tough love, and I don't look back at the concrete porch where I was left with a black plastic garbage bag. Instead, I spend my holidays in Michigan, sitting on the sun-drenched patio of a beautiful lakeside estate with Martha. We drink hot coffee, review high-level private equity portfolios, and laugh. Martha doesn't share a single drop of my DNA, but she is my mother in every way that actually matters. She is the woman who looked at a desperate, exhausted teenager in a crisis shelter and saw a titan. She gave me a safe place to land when the people who brought me into this world threw me away, and in return, I built her a sanctuary. That is what true family does. They invest in you when you have nothing, not just when you have a multi-million-dollar portfolio to show off at a country club gala. I'm sharing this story because I know exactly how heavy it feels to carry the label of the scapegoat, the burden, or the disappointment. Society constantly bombards us with the toxic narrative that family is an unbreakable bond, that blood is thicker than water, and that we owe our parents our infinite patience no matter how many times they break us. If you are watching this, and you are currently shrinking yourself just to keep the peace in a toxic household, I need you to hear me clearly. You do not owe anyone your future just because they gave you your past. You do not owe your hard-earned savings to a sibling who refuses to work. You do not owe your sanity to parents who view you as a disposable line item on a ledger. And you certainly do not owe your forgiveness to people who are only apologizing because they finally lost control over your life. Setting strict, unyielding boundaries is not an act of malice, and it is not an act of revenge. It is an act of sheer, uncompromising survival. You cannot heal in the exact same environment that broke you. Sometimes, the most empowering, beautiful thing you can do for yourself is to stand up, walk out the door, and let the heavy mahogany lock click completely shut behind you. The cold might shock your system at first, but I promise you, it will forge you into something entirely unbreakable. You have the power to build your own table, choose your own family, and define your own worth. And once you realize that your value isn't tied to their validation, you become completely unstoppable. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end of this journey. Reopening these chapters wasn't easy, but keeping toxic secrets hidden only protects the people who put them there in the first place. If my story resonated with you, or if it reminded you of a situation you're currently fighting your way out of, please leave a comment below. The YouTube algorithm loves comments, but more importantly, this community needs to hear your voice. Tell me, what is the hardest boundary you've ever had to set, and how did it change your life? I read every single one, and sharing your truth might be the exact push someone else needs to finally walk away from their own toxic situation. If this video helped you feel seen, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel to support what we do here. And if you want more stories about reclaiming your power, overcoming betrayal, and building your own empire, check the description box below. There's another video waiting for you that I know you'll connect with just as deeply. Until next time, remember to protect your peace, know your worth, and never let anyone hand you less than you deserve. I'll see you in the next one.